The story kicked off in Joseon. That's what they called the country that was right where Korea is now. Every morning in Joseon started the same way, with brutal training sessions. For His Highness, skipping practice was like taking an L in battle for the homeland, so he always showed up on time. His Highness's hands were used to heavy loads, sports equipment, and workout machines. His training buddies would crack jokes, hiding their jealousy of his killer physique. Each training session lasted no more than an hour, but the grueling workouts felt endless because of the daily grind. Gradually, he lost count of breaths in and out, jumps, squats, combat moves, lifts. Kang was just a regular Korean dude who learned about bodybuilding while in the army and later got into nutritional science. Service on the front lines taught Kang to deal with seriously harsh living conditions, toughening his character and teaching him patience in any circumstances. The only comfort for Kang's mind and body was the gym, where the young buff guy would spend hours among the soulless machines. His classmates' mockery didn't bug him. He barely talked to them, not out of arrogance, but because they had nothing in common. Constant training paid off, and the guy got a physical education instructor certificate with a bodybuilding qualification. After finishing the courses, he gathered his friends and threw a party, with music, fast food, beer, and dancing. But everything went smoothly. Left alone, Kang turned on the TV and learned from the news about the sudden death of King Jin, which unwittingly pushed him towards strange thoughts. His thoughts carried him to Joseon and to imagining a different fate where he could end up there tomorrow and see that place from a completely different angle. Falling asleep, the athlete caught only fragments of ideas where he was rewriting history, changing military codes, laws, and prices, not holding on to any one thought until the end. Suddenly, a rooster's crow sounded clearly in his head, followed by a feeling of ridiculous anxiety, not connected to illness or the reality of the past day. He was afraid to open his eyes, understanding that he'd fallen asleep at home alone, wasn't expecting visitors, didn't have a cough, and definitely no status of highness. Kang sat up sharply in bed, and everything swam before his eyes, his head spun, and sounds and thoughts mixed into a chaotic mess. Opening his eyes, the guy only understood part of what was happening. Around him was someone else's house and clothes, minimal furniture, natural wood, hanji partitions, and warm ondol floor. Behind the door again came a persistent voice, demanding he get up. Kang hesitated, realizing the strangeness of what was happening, feeling that the surroundings didn't look like his usual space. When he saw his body, shock gripped him completely. There were no muscles, no tan, pale skin, a thin and weak figure. First conclusion: this was clearly not his body. In a panic, he ran out into the courtyard, looking around. Everything around seemed foreign, unfamiliar, and a man at the entrance again asked a strange question about a cough, intensifying the confusion. Panic gradually gave way to curiosity. Kang Yeon started asking people in the courtyard about his predecessors, trying to understand names and the connection to this world, getting quick answers. The answers suggested Yusu, Jilido. Slowly, it dawned on him that he was in Joseon and his new body belonged to the son of the fourth king Qin, and he himself was now Suyun. Kang knew the history of the era well. He could easily identify the area, recognize personalities and events. His consciousness tried to come to terms with the new status of Prince Suyun. Doubts tormented his mind, but his eyes, hearing, and smell indicated the reality of what was happening. Everything looked too tangible and convincing to consider it a dream or illusion. From the behavior of the subjects, Kang Yeon was able to determine the approximate period, 1445. This information brought relief and joy, strengthening confidence in what was happening. From people's words, he learned that a meeting with Jin himself awaited him. It was unknown how long he would stay in the body of Li Zhen, but the appointment of the meeting was an important event. When he saw Jin, the anticipation seemed less significant than the meeting. The history student managed to hide his surprise, watching the person he was about to face. Bowing before the king, Li Zhen, Prince Suyun, feared making a mistake, but the ruler valued the young man's talent, ignoring his doubts, and ordered him to rewrite the chronicle. By the king's order, the prince went to Chiphaeonmun, a mountain principality with Eastern-style houses and temples carved into rocks, where he was to fulfill the received task. Kang realized that despite moving through time and space, his body and mind retained the knowledge and skills of the new owner. There were no problems with writing and speech. Being in the archive with other employees, he admired aloud the calligraphy of Li Zhen, Prince Suyun, which was perceived by others as a display of some audacity. Having access to historical documents, the history student began studying biographies of rulers ascending to the throne and leaving it, including Jin, Munjan, and Tanjan. Moving on to the next character and knowing the outcome of his fate, the young man decided to intervene and change the course of history, trying to direct events differently. His reflections were interrupted by a quiet bow, and raising his eyes, Prince Suyun saw a slender young man whom he recognized as his older brother, the crown prince, standing before him. The former history student envied himself because before him stood a historical figure of the entire Joseon era, the future 5th king Hyungjun, whose role in history was significant. Prince Suyun addressed his brother, asking why he came, and the slender young man replied that he was checking the font of books before sending them to their father to make sure of the accuracy of the transcription. Prince Suyun became interested in whether his older brother knew about the deterioration of their father's vision, and if so, from what time the problems began, about which he himself did not yet have complete information. The older brother noticed the first signs of senile farsightedness in their father about a year ago. This observation worried him and made him watch the parents' condition more carefully. Leaving the reading room, Hyungjun warned the scribe that the deterioration of their father's health was a secret that could not be disclosed. Any conversations on this subject were considered forbidden and risky. Prince Suyun sat at work all day, after which he felt his neck had stiffened. He began doing his usual exercises, causing surprise and interest from everyone present in the room. It seemed his athletic essence, stuck in the body of a weak and thin person, had been waiting only for this moment. He sat his colleagues down and showed several warm-up exercises. The reaction of those around was mixed. Some enthusiastically repeated the movements. Others considered it a waste of time, not understanding the purpose of the exercises and the benefits of physical activity. However, Kang, having the authority of a prince, decided to get his colleagues used to physical education. The next day, he continued group classes, gradually introducing the habit into the daily routine. Day after day, the habit of taking breaks for stretching spread throughout the entire territory of the mountain principality of Chipyeonmun. Employees gradually got into it and began to perceive exercises as part of the routine. One day, Prince Suyun went to the local market looking for sesame oil and medicinal herbs. Walking among the crowd of simple traders, he noticed their surprise and embarrassment at his presence. Despite the fact that one trader wanted to give the prince all his goods, Suyun remained honest and paid with gold coins for 5 types of oil, observing fairness and order. The servant walking beside him pondered all the way about the reasons for the trip. He didn't understand why such a high-ranking person needed to personally go to the market and look for some components for preparing medicines. The real Prince Suyun died from a severe form of dermatitis. Kang discovered this information recently in the books of the local library, and, having comprehended what he read, decided to prevent his own fatal outcome at any cost. Returning from the market, the prince encountered a series of subtle reproaches. A pretty woman with a calm face expressed hidden indignation about the sharp and recent change in her husband's behavior. Kang didn't immediately realize who exactly was considered the husband and that everything said applied to him. Gradually, it became clear that he was being addressed by the wife of the person in whose body he now found himself, Prince Suyun. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, the new owner of the body maintained an even and calm tone. He let his wife know that he was looking for a new hygiene product, which he learned about from books, and which is used in distant provinces. Former athlete Kang, like no one else in this area, understood the importance of body cleanliness. That's why he was looking for a way to create soap, considering it a necessary means for maintaining health in new conditions. He knew well that sports activities are accompanied by profuse sweating. If not washed off thoroughly, it can cause skin diseases, including dermatitis, which became the cause of the prince's death. Suddenly, Kang remembered that in his time, he had already tried making soap using an old lady's recipe. Then, the experience was successful, and the result fully justified expectations, which gave him confidence now. In fact, the soap recipe was surprisingly simple. It required mixing olive oil, water, and ash from burnt straw in precise proportions, then heating the mixture to a certain temperature. Prince Suyun gave this recipe to his wife, which caused her genuine surprise. It was hard for her to imagine that a combination of olive oil and ash could serve to cleanse the human body. To get his wife interested in his idea, Prince Suyun explained that soap is suitable not only for cleansing skin of dirt and microbes, but also for washing clothes, as well as washing objects inside and outside the house. The wife, having heard out her husband, wished him success and hurried to leave. From this situation, Kang clearly understood that Prince Suyun had a difficult and cold relationship with his lawful wife. The next day, Prince Suyun, together with his faithful servant, took up soap making. He realized that a perfect result was impossible on the first try and would require more than one experiment. In the cooking process, everything looked right, except for the smell. Despite this, the prince understood that he had to test the first batch of soap personally to evaluate the result in practice. Pouring the liquid soap mass into molds and waiting for it to cool completely, the prince ordered hot water to be poured into the tub and took a bath, listening carefully to the sensations. The effect of using the soap pleased him, but not completely. The sesame oil gave off an unpleasant smell, and Suyun was already looking for what to replace it with for future large-scale production. He planned to distribute soap throughout the entire state of Joseon, so the question of ingredients became fundamental. Any little thing could affect the success of the intended business. Besides this, Kang, as a former athlete, was seriously concerned about the health of King Jin. He doubted that, being the second son, he could convince his father to change his lifestyle. Despite the parents' arrogant attitude toward his son, who was not the heir, the younger one decided to act with logic, seeking to push the sick person toward losing excess weight. Kang still wasn't used to the new body. The absence of muscles and sagging skin clearly indicated that Prince Suyun had never previously engaged in physical exercise. He understood that to convince others you need to match your own words. Suyun needed daily loads, and the idea of a treatise on the benefits of sports promised good for the entire dynasty. Hanging even a few minutes on the pull-up bar in Suyun's chubby body was hard, but the prince stubbornly continued training, forcing muscles to work through fatigue and shortness of breath. Every morning, the prince went out to the courtyard and performed exercises in front of his subjects, demonstrating perseverance and discipline, which gradually changed the attitude of those around. Hanging by his hands, he bent and straightened his legs 29 times, bringing the movement to completion and controlling his breathing despite the tension in his core. On a wooden board, the young man started with 50 push-ups and after a week confidently reached 100, cementing progress with daily practice. The most difficult exercise in Suyun's body remained the dragon plank, requiring core strength and endurance disproportionate to his appearance. Despite the incompatibility of the body with the tasks, Kang noted that the prince's pulling and core strength went beyond the normal capabilities of a person with such a physique. Kang considered the only explanation for this effect to be the genetics of ancestors, which Suyun inherited, allowing the body to adapt to loads faster. After some time, local blacksmiths brought the prince a set of dumbbells, created according to Kang's design, carefully checking the weight and shape of each item. The prince paid for the work, and the blacksmiths left satisfied but puzzled by the amount of iron, not fully understanding the true purpose of the order. Even being a prince, Kang remembered the importance of strength training, so Suyun enthusiastically mastered the dumbbells, strengthening body and will. Watching from the side what was happening, the young maid didn't stop being internally outraged that the master was either rubbing himself with oil or exchanging 80 pounds for iron, considering its strange wastefulness. The lady also saw everything happening, understood the essence of things, and patiently tolerated the maid's discontent, until one day she crossed the line, allowing herself to hint at the prince's lack of attention to his own wife. Such audacity was immediately stopped, and the lady with a cold remark made the maid shut up, making it clear that personal questions were not within the circle of her permitted reasoning and were not subject to discussion. Sometimes the prince invited his wife for walks in the garden, but these outings barely resembled romantic time, as his thoughts were occupied with collecting rare flowers and observing their properties. Despite this, the young lady felt calm next to her husband, finding special charm in his concentration and feeling a rare sense of harmony in their joint silent presence. During one such walk, the prince picked a sakura blossom and held it out to the lady, looking at his wife differently than before, as if noticing her for the first time not just as a companion, but as a source of inspiration. In one of the rooms lay ready-made soap, cooked with the addition of sakura blossoms, and the young lady decided to take a bath that evening, using the fragrant bar of unusual purpose. The procedure turned out to be unexpectedly pleasant, since already after the first soaping, the skin became clean, velvety, and saturated with aroma, and light soap bubbles rested on the water and in the air. Later, someone quietly knocked on the prince's chambers, and having received permission to enter, an embarrassed wife appeared on the threshold, whose excitement clearly betrayed a strong impression from the recent experience. She expressed admiration for the invention, but pointed out the sharp smell of oil, after which Kang rejected the idea of replacing the base as unprofitable and accepted the suggestion of adding linden and camellia oils, thanking his wife. A few days later, the prince arrived in a poor coastal village. The appearance of such a high-ranking person caused different reactions among residents. Some didn't recognize the guest, others respectfully greeted him. The prince ordered the village elder to be summoned and promised to send his family the best products every 2 weeks. In return, he was to provide accurate information about the growth and weight of village children. Not all villagers participated in the experiment, only families with small children. There were 22 such households, and each of them was included in the observation on equal terms. Children from 11 families were prescribed a protein diet. The other 11 received food rich in carbohydrates and fats, while changes in body weight and mobility were carefully recorded. Listening to the younger son's report, the king didn't hold back laughter. With this, he openly demonstrated disdain for the efforts of the prince, who was trying to find a way to cure the stubborn parent. Meanwhile, local craftsmen received an order from Suyun. They were to forge iron discs of different diameters, intended for subsequent mounting on a strong iron rod. This is how Kang calculated to replenish the list of his sports equipment with a new item. He wanted a full-fledged barbell, suitable for strength training, to appear at his disposal. After several months of hard work with fire, hammer, and red-hot metal, Kang saw the result. Before him stood a barbell whose total weight reached 240 kilograms. The blacksmith was amazed hearing the prince's next order. He was required to create an even more massive barbell whose weight should already be 300 kilograms. For an additional fee, Soo-yoon inquired whether the craftsman could roll an iron plate into a 3-foot tube. He couldn't let go of the thought of creating new, unusual weapons. Leaving the coastal village after an agreement with the local elder, the servant boy, who heard all the prince's orders, tried to cheer up his master, assuring him that the king would like his son's enthusiasm. In response, the prince, having carefully assessed the physique of his interlocutor, offered him to improve his physical form according to his own methodology and training system, which embarrassed the servant, although the idea itself seemed quite attractive to him. Returning to the palace, Kang arranged a meeting with his older brother, Crown Prince Youngjun, hoping to discuss an important matter without unnecessary delays and outsiders, so that the conversation would go smoothly and substantively. The stately young man didn't keep anyone waiting and appeared on time, immediately noting the prince's noticeable weight loss, but sincerely didn't understand the true purpose of the meeting and therefore expected explanations without unnecessary preambles. Soo-yoon didn't drag out the explanations and immediately got down to business, presenting the crown prince with a box, inside which, like a rare treasure, was what seemed to be the most ordinary piece of soap. Following his brother's hints, Youngjun soaped his hands, rinsed off the foam with water, and was genuinely surprised by the result, noticing that the skin became significantly softer, cleaner, and acquired a pleasant, delicate aroma. The crown prince brought his hand to his nose, trying to recognize the painfully familiar smell, and realized that it was the aroma of camellia, after which he thought about the high cost of such products, having a good idea of their market prices. Soo-yoon's wife answered the question that arose, explaining that mixing tetradium oil with a small amount of rice allows significantly reducing the cost of soap creation without loss of its beneficial properties. Having carefully listened to the story about the money spent and results achieved, the crown prince took a pen and, relying on his own conclusions, drafted a decree concerning issues of cleanliness and health. The decree stated that for the sake of maintaining hygiene, all Joseon officials must wash their hands and entire body, and it was also suggested that over time soap would become affordable for every resident of Joseon. Having reread the decree several times, Soo-yoon doubted whether his brother really expected that mandatory use of soap would eventually force people to buy it out of their own need and initiative. The crown prince only smiled slyly, confident that his order was law for every resident of Joseon, and with a successful outcome, it would be quite appropriate to introduce an additional tax. For a moment, Kang wanted to break out of Soo-yoon's body and express delight at his brother's savvy, but local customs didn't encourage excessive emotionality and closeness. One day, two unfamiliar men approached the blacksmiths and canceled Prince Soo-yoon's order, naming a different name and demanding they stop making discs and the tube. The blacksmiths were extremely upset by the unexpected order and confused by the interference of outsiders, because they were counting on completing the work and receiving decent payment. Having begun remelting almost finished discs, the forge workers didn't understand who was giving orders and for what reason the order was canceled, but didn't dare to disobey. The two strangers discussed what happened between themselves, outraged that the second prince was allowed to spend so much iron on body training. Meanwhile, rumors were spreading throughout the kingdom about a miraculous remedy called soap, which so far only members of the royal family had tried. Gradually, servants began using soap not only for hands, but also for face, rejoicing at the effect and proudly telling each other about removed stains. People admired not only the action of the product, but also the one who created it, Prince Soo-yoon, although those close doubted he was capable of such a discovery. Meanwhile, the noticeably thinner and better-looking Prince Soo-yoon diligently worked out on the machine. Now, he could easily perform 10 bench presses with a barbell weighing 120 kilograms. Everyone who watched his grueling workouts didn't hide their sincere surprise and admiration for their master's physical form, believing that such drastic changes were only possible with a rare gift. Looking at the machine, Kang felt quiet joy that he had at least partially managed to realize what he had planned, even while not in his own body, far from his native home and completely in a different era. During a visit to the blacksmiths, wanting to know about the readiness of the order, Prince Soo-yoon heard vague excuses that the work wouldn't be completed on time due to an incomprehensible design, which the craftsman never got around to. Soo-yoon was gripped by indignation at what he heard. He was deeply upset by the workers' ignorance, but besides stern reproaches, he couldn't offer them anything and was forced to contain his irritation. The wife of the second prince, watching the heavy training of the servant that her husband arranged for himself, mentally noted that her companion had really changed for the better, involuntarily comparing him with General Wanbom. Catching the train of her thoughts, the prince felt pleasant surprise and noted that servants of the royal dynasty must be physically developed so that in case of danger they can defeat the enemy even without weapons. Suddenly, there was noise at the gates, heavy doors swung open, and a crowd of unfamiliar men unceremoniously burst into the courtyard, violating the usual order and peace of the prince's private property. The young lady, maintaining external calm, tried to find out the grounds for such an audacious intrusion, but her question sounded against the background of growing tension and anxiety that gripped the courtyard. One of the visitors threw a hard look at the woman and, threateningly raising his palm, made it clear that he intended to make her shut up, regardless of her position or the rules of decency. Soo-yun didn't watch what was happening for long. Then, with one of the techniques, sharply and accurately pushed the threatening one aside. The man in the hat flew several meters and crashed heavily to the ground. The prince approached the uninvited guest, coldly assessing his condition, and demanded explanations of how he dared to appear without an invitation and allow himself audacity toward his wife. The man in the hat reminded Soo-yun of a past meeting and tried to continue, but was interrupted. The prince warned Captain Sukri not to encroach on his family and subjects, otherwise, the consequences would be serious. The uninvited guest wasn't going to back down. He demonstrated part of the already manufactured weapons, mentioning 400 swords, and wondered why someone who was interested in nothing 6 months ago needed such volumes. Then, the captain's people brought out a bound and beaten elder from the coastal village into the center of the courtyard. He confessed that for modest pay, he kept records of the weight and height of local children. Soo-yun didn't remain silent. He stepped forward and firmly stated that such an audacious intrusion organized by Captain Sukri and his soldiers required evidence, not groundless accusations. The captain turned out to be an audacious and self-confident person. With a mocking smirk, he made it clear that at the slightest suspicion of illegal actions by citizens, he was obliged to react immediately. To the stubbornness of the visitor, Soo-yun responded in kind. From the outside, what was happening resembled the meeting of two rams on a narrow bridge, where each intended to go forward and wasn't going to yield. Watching the situation, the prince clearly realized the determination of the captain and his people. Even an attempt to justify himself could be turned against him and become a new reason for accusations. Kang knew well that since arriving in this era in the prince's body, he hadn't done anything bad. On the contrary, all his actions were aimed at improving the lives of Joseon residents. Suddenly, the crown prince appeared in the hubbub of the crowd. Without unnecessary emotions, he inquired about what was happening, noting that he was sure. The younger brother was again looking for another way to temper and test himself. When the crown prince approached his brother, Captain Sukri tried to stop him. He warned that the madman's intentions were unknown to anyone and the situation could be dangerous for others. The audacity of the words addressed to the younger brother caused an instant reaction from Hyungjun. He looked coldly at the captain, making it clear that such expressions were unacceptable when it came to a member of the royal dynasty. Then the crown prince turned his attention to Soo-yun and demanded explanations. He made it clear that he valued his brother's words, but wasn't going to break the law even for family ties. Captain Sukri was clearly amused by the unfolding spectacle. Meanwhile, Kang, being not in his own body, realized the need to urgently find convincing arguments so as not to end up in the local prison again. While the conversation between the captain and crown prince continued, Soo-yun quietly gave a sign to the servant. He asked to bring a book, counting on using it as the only possible argument in the current situation. The servant returned quickly. Soo-yun didn't make lengthy explanations, but instead handed his brother the book, preferring to let what was written speak for him and determine the further course of events. Hyungjun briefly read several lines on a randomly opened page. After this, he again wondered what exactly his brother had planned, investing such significant funds in processing metal for weapons and equipment. Soo-yun leaned toward the crown prince and said he was ready to tell everything in private. He emphasized that in his intentions, the main place was occupied by family, and personal motives should not become the property of outsiders. Left without witnesses, the younger brother carefully began talking about the illness of their father, King Qin. Soo-yun made it clear that without decisive measures, their father might soon go to his forefathers, leaving the family without support. The crown prince listened carefully to his brother, but doubted his competence and tried to console him, explaining that blindness at that age is not always a harbinger of imminent death. Hyungjun demanded solid evidence from Soo-yun. In response, the younger one listed profuse sweating and excess weight, indicating that such symptoms often testify to diabetes in the king. When the crown prince suggested ordinary overwork, the prince dared to interrupt him and added that their father constantly overeats during each meal, exacerbating the condition of his own health. After this, the crown prince inquired for what purpose Soo-yun organized a diet for poor children. Suspecting a hidden intent and wanting to understand the true motives of such an unusual initiative. It was then that Kang wanted to reveal the truth that he was an athlete, historian, and a bit of a nutritionist, so he knew a lot about health and nutrition issues. However, such an admission would mean exposure and risk of getting into an unpredictable situation, so, being in the prince's body, Soo-yoon chose a more cautious explanation. He told his brother that in his book he described in detail how through diet control one can gradually reduce a person's weight and improve the overall condition of the body without harm. The prince sincerely assured the crown prince of the purity of his intentions toward their father and the entire royal family, and his words sounded quite convincingly and calmly. The crown prince ordered the captain to remove the soldiers from the prince's courtyard, citing the absence of facts for detention and insufficient grounds for further harsh measures. Sukri objected, declaring his duty as a guardian of the law, and then the head of the morals inspection intervened, announcing his intention to disobey the order and bring Soo-yoon to light. The crown prince considered it unacceptable to ignore the importance of procedures established by law, even if the alleged criminal was related to him by blood and aroused personal sympathy. Under pressure from the persistent captain and his supporters, the crown prince understood that there was no other way out, and therefore asked his brother to explain in detail to everyone the essence and goals of his research. Finding no other solution, Soo-yoon decided to reveal the whole truth, but feared the consequences and the reaction of those around to the mention of a noticeable deterioration in the health of the king himself. Realizing that forcing such a lazy person as Jin to regularly engage in physical exercise was almost unrealistic, the prince proposed to clearly show the limits and possibilities of the human body. The brothers exchanged glances, and the instigator of the whole story quietly made it clear to the elder that he first had to reconvince the ignorant witnesses and only then try to influence their father. The crown prince began the explanation by emphasizing the education and sincere care of his younger brother, noting that that's why he undertook the development of ways to strengthen health. The captain listened to the report with utmost attention, seeking hidden meaning in every phrase, and repeatedly returned to the same questions, suspecting possible deception. Those present looked with bewilderment at the sports machine, not understanding how lifting weights could favorably affect a person's well-being and general condition. At this stage, the crown prince again took the floor and suggested the true reason for the head of morals visit, linking the inspection with an excessive number of purchases and the need to justify them. Sukri accepted the conditions put forward, not suspecting what consequences this agreement would lead to and what chain of events would be launched by what seemed a simple and formal decision. Prince Soo-yoon was ready for grueling loads, believing that his muscles and strength shown here would become the best proof of physical health and endurance. For the experiment, the captain chose the strongest man from among his military personnel, who was to demonstrate physical power before all participants. The second participant in the experiment, naturally, was the prince himself, ready to prove that his abilities were not inferior to the chosen soldier and capable of impressing even experienced warriors. Lying on the machine, Soo-yoon explained in detail the principle of the effect of weight on human muscles and also emphasized the importance of regular and prolonged training for strength and health. The military member from among the participants didn't listen to the prince's instructions, completely relying on his own strength and hoping that it would bring him success without advice from an experienced athlete. When the soldier jerked the barbell off the rack, he felt as if the entire weight of the world had fallen on his shoulders, and the struggle with this weight turned out to be much more difficult than he expected. Gritting his teeth, the poor guy barely held the barbell above himself, trying not to drop the weight and simultaneously save face before the royal army and the captain, who watched every movement. The soldier's strength was exhausted almost immediately, and the barbell suddenly slipped from his weakened hands, falling to the floor, which became an obvious defeat in the experiment and the cause of the captain's disappointment. The captain, annoyed by his subordinate's loss, became interested in the prince's condition and closely watched how the young heir demonstrated his abilities without the slightest difficulty. But his surprise reached its limit when the prince already for the 8th time confidently pressed the barbell, and the crown prince, watching what was happening, couldn't contain his admiration for the younger brother's superpowers. Soo-yoon continued to press the barbell, not losing count, demonstrating incredible strength and endurance, his movements amazed with precision and power, like a sports machine. The spectacle was epic, with the smell of sweat and tension, but the prince looked magnificent, combining physical power with dignity and natural grace. Having risen from the machine, he explained in detail that proper nutrition and regular moderate loads allow achieving impressive results in lifting weight. For the captain and his servants, such words and explanations seemed strange and incomprehensible, perceived as empty chatter or fiction of unclear meaning. The prince sat silently on the machine, not trying to argue or add anything, content with what he had already shown and proven by his own example. Sukri left the courtyard in a state of defeat, but didn't acknowledge his defeat, leaving a threat of further proceedings as a shadow over the current event. The crowd of observers gradually dispersed, and soon, only close ones remained in the middle of the courtyard, the two princes and the young lady, creating an atmosphere of calm and comfort. Leaving, Youngjin promised to help his brother with writing a book about health, demonstrating care and readiness to support his relative in all undertakings. Left alone, the young spouses decided to be support and backing for each other, to cope with possible troubles and difficulties that life prepared. At the end of the conversation, Kang couldn't help himself, embraced his young wife, showing tenderness and warmth, creating a moment of closeness and mutual affection between them. The young princess felt the bliss of closeness briefly. She shamed her husband for the emotional impulse in front of people, noting that it's better to show feelings in chambers. Despite the awkwardness of the situation, the princess felt embarrassment from her husband's action, her inner warmth mixed with excitement which she couldn't hide completely. In Captain Sukri's entourage, a completely different mood reigned. The subordinate apologized for the defeat in competition with the prince, demonstrating excessive guilt. While Sukri listened to regrets, he reflected on what he had seen today. He was haunted by a thin, hollow rod of iron, similar to ancient tubular weapons. By the end of the day, the captain was almost convinced that the prince was striving to create his own version of firearms, combining ideas with unexpected boldness. The captain remembered the hunt where he observed the prince's fury. This side of personality sharply contrasted with the image of a caring person he usually demonstrated. Today, Sukri promised himself not to take his eyes off the prince, intending at all costs to uncover his true intentions and plans. For 3 months after the incident with the inspection, the blacksmiths returned to work. They again made orders intended for Prince Suyun, gradually restoring rhythm. A warm spring morning didn't foretell trouble. The young princess came from the doctor and informed her husband that she was pregnant, bringing unexpected joy and anxiety to the palace simultaneously. On this joyful note, Kang pitied his real self. He remembered the past when he lived peacefully, had 2 wives, a barbell and dumbbell, and the world seemed simple and measured. Coming to his senses, the present Suyun picked up his wife and, not holding back emotions, joyfully spun her around, feeling a rare calm and clear happiness for himself. The young people faced a difficult task, to properly and carefully present the news of the pregnancy to King Jin without causing anger and unnecessary suspicions. From the first days of pregnancy, the prince began to monitor his wife's health even more carefully, thinking through the daily routine and even developing special breathing exercises for her. Suyun was frightened by the fact that mortality of mothers and children in that era was not uncommon, because even the crown princess once died in childbirth. He tried with all his might to prevent such a sad outcome for his wife, not allowing fear to paralyze his mind and pushing himself to search for solutions. The prince understood that it was necessary to invent a disinfectant, since death most often occurred due to infection and the absence of elementary cleanliness. After some time, a messenger brought to the mansion doors the finished invention, which craftsmen made by the prince's order, a container for storing soju. The wild-looking vessel was called sojutkori and was initially intended for storing soju, not arousing any suspicion among others. However, Suyun ordered this vessel to be created for obtaining a disinfectant, hiding the true purpose under the usual form. After long attempts and experiments with proportions of alcohol and water, the disinfecting liquid was created, and the prince accustomed his entourage to daily physical education. Looking at his wife, whose childbirth was approaching, and remembering everything that happened after moving to the Joseon era, Kang reflected on the nature of reality and the timing of possible return. Time flew by rapidly, and with the birth of an heir to the prince and princess, such thoughts became rare. Kang gradually got used to the new position and accepted the role. One day, Prince Suyun was summoned by King Jin. In a hall full of representatives of the royal army, the heir heard praise for replenishing the treasury thanks to inventions and trade. That day, the king showed unusual generosity and granted the young family 200 nayang as a gift for the birth of their firstborn, thereby strengthening their position at court. Additionally, the ruler ordered the use of alcohol in treating mothers and children, considering this a useful measure, which caused surprise among those present. After what was said, King Jin suddenly lost strength, fell to the side, and fell into a deep faint. This event occurred in March 1438. At each meeting, the brothers discussed their father's condition and found no effective means of healing, continuing to give the king a decoction without noticeable result. One day, Suyun inquired of the crown prince whether their father complained about his health. The older brother mentioned only complaints about deteriorating vision. Kang remembered historical facts and realized that in a year, King Jin would become completely blind. Having checked the dates, he noticed the approach of mother's birthday. On this day, Kang decided to convince his father to be treated by his method, demonstrating strength through squats, bench press, and deadlift, bringing each exercise to 1,000 feet. Despite good physical preparation, the prince at the moment was pressing 900 feet. It would be difficult to reach 1,000 in such a short time, but he understood that this was necessary. At one of the meetings, the brothers agreed that Soo-yoon would present practical points in the book, and Young-jun would adapt the text for better understanding so that it would reach their father. However, inequality existed in this tandem. Soo-yoon didn't know how to competently express his thoughts, and the older brother ordered him to study with Kang, which the latter was displeased with. Despite his dislike of science, Soo-yoon accepted the conditions. Common efforts were aimed at saving their father's life. So, the brothers decided to act together and support each other. To improve physical form, the prince together with his servant began climbing mountains in the mornings, doing this regularly and gradually increasing the load. At lunchtime after a meal, Soo-yoon devoted hours to reading books, trying to absorb new knowledge and learn to formulate his own thoughts more clearly. Watching the younger brother's diligence, the crown prince either joked about him or sincerely encouraged him, seeing how seriously he approached the goal. These days, the prince significantly limited the amount of food he consumed. He went on a strict diet, considering it part of the necessary discipline. Young Princess Yuk, looking at her husband's modest diet, was alternately amazed by his willpower and felt sorry for him, understanding what effort this cost him. Grueling workouts on machines, Soo-yoon alternated with rock climbing. Such a regimen noticeably strengthened his muscles and body, adding endurance and strength. By the appointed day, Prince Soo-yoon became almost unrecognizable. Before the court appeared a stately, strong, and well-built man whose body radiated strength, endurance, and noticeable health. The long-awaited holiday came in honor of the queen's birthday. This celebration gathered all the royal army and nobility, turning the palace square into the center of general attention. High-ranking guests took their seats in boxes and watched the performance. Traveling actors, circus horses, and a fire show replaced each other, delighting those gathered. Among the spectators was also the king, whose health had temporarily improved. He closely followed what was happening, trying not to miss a single detail of the festive action. Prince Soo-yoon's appearance was scheduled last. His excitement gradually increased because this moment was to decide whether he could convince his parent. When the turn came, Soo-yoon came out onto the square before the spectators. Dropping to his knees, he honored his mother with congratulations, and it was hard to say who was more worried. The prince expressed gratitude to his parents for the life and body granted. However, the abundance of iron equipment around their son caused noticeable alarm in the parents. Having thrown off his cloak, Soo-yoon demonstrated his physical form. A broad back, powerful chest, and strong limbs were striking, making the prince almost unrecognizable. He performed different exercises, showing training and strength. Especially impressive were the power techniques, emphasizing control over the body and endurance. The queen mother didn't hide her delight and joy for her son. She clapped her hands and laughed sincerely, like a child, proud of the result she saw. All present in the hall, including the parents, were amazed when the prince announced that he was capable of lifting a weight of 240 kilograms, not hiding his strength. Soo-yoon began squatting with a barbell weighing 240 kilograms. His mother, watching from the stands, became noticeably alarmed and tried to stop this action. The demonstration of strength continued. The prince took on his shoulders a barbell weighing 340 kilograms and began squatting, then stood up again, repeating the movement many times. The spectacle caused fear in the queen mother. She stood motionless, watching every movement of her son and trying to hide the anxiety that grew with each second. Servants began carrying heavy metal discs onto the arena one after another. Soo-yoon warned that the next lift would be even more impressive and dangerous. To support his back, Soo-yoon asked the servant to tighten a wide belt on his waist. This gave him confidence when performing incredibly heavy barbell lifts. The next weight of the barbell that the prince lifted overhead was 400 kilograms. The crowd couldn't believe their eyes and whispered among themselves. People in the hall began to suspect that something was wrong with the prince's behavior. Whispers spread quickly, and fear and anxiety mixed with surprise. Kang understood all the absurdity of what was happening. He realized the risk, but completely relied on his trained body and reliable belt, allowing him to cope with the incredible load. His confidence and strength left spectators in a state of shock. Each new barbell lift confirmed that Soo-yoon's physical capabilities went beyond ordinary understanding. The young athlete lifted the barbell, and spectators in the hall couldn't believe their eyes, seeing such strength and endurance. Kang showed that the preparation brought results. The queen felt bad from what she saw, her heart clenched with worry, and she couldn't hide the trembling, watching her son who demonstrated amazing physical power. Kang dropped the barbell and ran to his temporary mother, trying to calm her and show that everything was fine with him, that his body withstood the load and recovery was going successfully. The woman sobbed, tears rolled down her cheeks. She reproached her younger son for not sparing himself and, experiencing such hardships, seemed to forget about parental care. After the woman's words, the ladies present didn't remain indifferent. their hearts filled with pity and admiration simultaneously. Emotions overflowed the hall and created a tense atmosphere. Each of the spectators had their own opinion about what was happening, but the king was truly proud of his son, noting how Kong had changed and how successfully he was applying the health recovery methodology. The father believed in his son's methodology, having seen the results, and realized that persistence and regular training are capable of working miracles, changing a person's physical condition for the better. When the king asked about motivation, Kang told that he took responsibility for the body given by his parents, and the striving for perfection became the stimulus for daily exhausting labor. The prince explained that initially the training was aimed at losing excess weight, and with each day strength grew, endurance increased, and the body gradually came into ideal form. Prolonged fatigue gradually left Kong. Now it completely disappeared, and the prince felt full of energy, ready for new trials and achievement of physical and spiritual goals. The king promised to carefully study the book that the brothers had long worked on, evaluating its content and benefit for the people and the state itself as a whole. For services to the people, the king issued an official decree, according to which the word "great" was added to the name of Prince Suyun, noting his merits and influence. The book made a strong impression on the king. He recognized it as matchless and was surprised by the depth of the younger son's knowledge, not expecting such a significant intellectual work from the young man. The only moment that caused the king doubt was the table in the book, but the son promised to explain the meaning of the data and enlighten the parent regarding details. The book indicated in detail that one bag of rice, approximately 5 kilograms, was capable of providing nutrition for an adult for 10 days and a child for 20 days. To prevent overeating, which contributes to obesity, it was recommended to add sesame oil to the diet, which provided necessary energy and supported the health of the body. At the meeting with the crown prince, the first thing that interested the young man concerned the father's reaction to the book's content, and he deliberately paused before reporting that the king agreed to do sports. The king gave a promise to begin training, but wasn't in a hurry to fulfill it, which prompted Suyun to seriously talk with his father and explain the threat of complete blindness without treatment. The king showed stubbornness and resistance to beginning physical activities, but gradually began asking the great prince about how the young man was able to guess about his ailment. The son bowed his head before the king and submissively explained that he understood a bit about symptoms of diseases, by which he was able to determine the father's condition, showing attentiveness and care. Prince the Great realized that finding himself here, he had to convince his father of the need for strict training. He carefully thought through every word and step to convey the essence. The young man designated a diagnosis to the king, calling his illness diabetes. He described all observations made during his father's meals, emphasizing habits that contribute to the ailment. Suyun noted that the king consumes too many sweets, which provokes the development of diabetes. This causes constant thirst and rapid fatigue, reducing the overall tone of the body. The king listened attentively to his son, realizing that he had accurately described the symptoms he himself was experiencing. Each word of the prince was like a recipe aimed at improving health. Prince the Great reported that his methodology was capable of curing the king in approximately 6 months. The king agreed to undergo therapy and strictly follow all his son's recommendations. Relations in the dynasty were more governmental than familial in nature. Therefore, the father warned his son about punishment in case the illness didn't retreat within the appointed time. The next day, training began, including horseback riding, working with dumbbells and other exercises. The prince personally monitored every movement of the king, controlling the load. The king complained of fatigue, but patiently followed his son's instructions, understanding that his health required effort and discipline, albeit unpleasant at first. Suyun sometimes made concessions to his father, allowing him to finish classes earlier. The old man rejoiced at such concessions, experiencing pleasure comparable to a child's joy. Inhale, exhale, the prince controlled, strictly monitoring breathing. He prescribed lifting the barbell 24 times, checking the king's strength, endurance, and persistence. The king was greatly upset by the new meager dietary ration. He no longer waited for mealtime with anticipation. He understood that the food was now tasteless, but healthy according to his son's words. Because of dissatisfaction with his food, the ruler took it out on the cook. His irritation grew, and even small cooking mistakes became a cause of anger. The great prince was greatly upset by the patient's impatience. He watched his father's condition and understood that past habits prevented adaptation to new rules. The son tried to explain to the king that the cook wasn't to blame. He reminded that the recipes were compiled by the great prince himself, and responsibility for the taste of food lay with him. Hearing this, the king couldn't contain his emotions and began shouting at everyone around. Irritation gripped everyone, and the atmosphere in the castle became tense. But Kang turned out to be a guy not of the timid kind. He reproached the temporary royal father for not keeping his word. This made the king stop and pull himself together. After the incident, the father ate the offered food, gritting his teeth, but without complaints. Each meal passed calmly, although internal discontent remained. Sports activities had been going on for 2 weeks already. The king performed all exercises, but didn't stop complaining about the absence of visible results, which added tension. The great prince often remained at the doors of the royal bedroom to control his father's desire to eat at night. He monitored so that discipline wasn't violated. After exhausting activities, King Jin quickly tired and, having settled some state affairs, went to bed early. Servants on duty at night at the doors of the royal bedroom began to notice that the king stopped producing his usual snoring, and this caused them surprise and alarm. Prince Suyun, to maintain his father's spirit, arranged joint outdoor training, trying to bring vigor and strength into the king's daily activities. In his sleep, Jin saw himself as a strong, fit, and healthy handsome man whom everyone around admired, and these visions inspired him for hard training during the day. A month had passed since the beginning of classes with the king, and Prince the Great decided to visit one of the famous engineers of his era, whose fame as an inventor is not forgotten even to this day. Suyun asked the engineer to create a primitive treadmill, but the scientist reported that the construction was extremely complex and would require several years for its completion and testing. Having repeated to the engineer the reason for haste connected with the parent's illness, Prince the Great insisted on significant acceleration of the process of creating this unusual technology. The prince's words affected the scientist, and he immediately sat down at the drawings, discussing with Suyun possible variants of construction and options for simplifying the mechanism. After a couple of hours, before Suyun's eyes appeared a sheet with a drawing, on which was depicted something similar to a modern running wheel for a hamster, but significantly increased in size. The prince liked the model of the so-called walker, and the creation project was completed in just 10 days, which exceeded all expectations of the engineer and the prince himself. 2 weeks later, a large running wheel was installed in the courtyard, and amazed with its impressive appearance, all inhabitants of the kingdom, causing delight and surprise. Examining the impressively sized running wheel, the crown prince sincerely rejoiced, because now his father had the opportunity to train at home, without leaving the palace and without disrupting the usual routine. However, Youngjun didn't share the general enthusiasm, and worried because the product hadn't yet passed tests, and the king could be the first to risk trying out the dubious machine. Suyun tried to dispel doubts and assured his brother that he himself had already run inside the wheel several times, checking its stability and safety, so reasons for alarm in his opinion didn't exist. But the crown prince didn't calm down and insisted that it would be more correct to first test the novelty on a person who, like their father, had nothing to do with sports and regular loads. Hearing this, Suyun looked slyly at his brother, and Hyungjun immediately understood exactly whom he had chosen for the experiment, stretching into an uncertain smile and hoping that the younger would change his mind. Hopes weren't justified, and already after a few minutes, the crown prince was cheerfully running inside the wheel, mentally counting time until stopping, though each minute dragged for him like a whole hour. Then, Suyun laid the crown prince on the machine and made him perform bench presses, sincerely surprised when his brother unexpectedly managed well to cope with this exercise without particular difficulties. When Hyungjun began to act capriciously and claim that it didn't befit him to engage in such nonsense, the younger brother kindly encouraged him, persuading him to hold on just a little longer. Later, Hyungjun even agreed to take the barbell on his shoulders, perfectly understanding that its weight was far from 200 kilograms, and yet considered this a serious test for himself. Squats with the barbell became the greatest madness to which the crown prince agreed, but for the sake of the younger he endured. And when fatigue made itself known, Suyun suggested exercises with dumbbells. In the first days of training, the king retained strong shortness of breath, so the prince had to structure classes brief but frequent, so that the load didn't harm and allowed gradually getting used to the running wheel. Over time, the king's breathing became more even, and the feeling of time spent in the running wheel stopped being painful and exhausting, turning into a tolerable and even useful habit. Periodically, the inventor-engineer asked the prince in detail about the dynamics of treating the king with running, seeking to understand changes and find a way to improve the device for greater efficiency. Meanwhile, ill-wishers whispered in corners, assuring each other that sports activities didn't befit a royal person, and while the king was running in the wheel, state affairs were supposedly going worse and worse. Mockery addressed to the king and prince sounded bolder and bolder. Words weren't chosen, and rumors grew, feeding discontent and distorting the true purpose of the ongoing training. Eventually, these conversations reached the crown prince, and Hyungjun decided to intervene, understanding that silence would only strengthen delusions and give ground for new speculation. Hyungjun consistently explained the benefits of physical activity, insisting on the favorable influence of classes on the king's health and on his own condition, pointing to already noticeable first results. Despite the crown prince's arguments, the interlocutor continued to complain about weight loss, considering it a sign of harm and claiming that such changes couldn't be beneficial for the king. The most radical gossips reached absurdity, talking about how in Joseon such a science as healthcare should be completely banned, considering it a dangerous innovation. One day, behind the backs of those discussing unexpectedly, appeared the king and crown prince, after which the conversation instantly stopped, and the gossips hastily dispersed without explaining the subject of conversation. The king's close associates gathered together, discussing ways to stop false talk about the effectiveness of treatment and the ruler's health condition. They were troubled by rumors capable of undermining trust in the court and authority. Profuse sweating still remained, but the volume of liquid consumed decreased. Kang reflected on Chin's health, understanding that it was too early to draw conclusions because only 3 months of classes had passed. Time flew by unnoticed. Since Kang moved into Suyun's body, 2 years had passed. Winter came again to Joseon, and the former life seemed a vague, almost unreal dream. One winter morning, the chief inspector came to the palace with the first rays of sun, explaining his visit with the desire to share the burden of managing the state together with Zhou and show ostentatious devotion. Suyun stated that there were no reasons for concern due to disorder of affairs, and the official was clearly exaggerating. Despite this, the unpleasant person showed persistence and intended to go further. Then the prince decided to joke about the gloomy inspector, suggesting he think about physical form. However, the official made it clear that he couldn't afford to waste time with an abundance of affairs. The great prince noted that even 1 hour out of 12 devoted to health wouldn't damage duties. His words sounded calm, but mocking insistence was hidden in them. The chief inspector found an answer to this argument too, emphasizing that for the royal dynasty, every hour given to state affairs was important. He wished the king health and hastily departed. The local inspector's office had the right to pass sentences even on representatives of royal nobility. Work there boiled without stopping, but the results of proceedings were far from always honest. In this hall, fateful decisions were made, often without evidence, only on the basis of rumors and gossip. People's fates broke quickly, and the true truth rarely mattered. A few days later, the inspector arrived at the king's court again. His goal was to persuade the ruler of Joseon to give up health gymnastics, which he considered harmful, excessive activity for the monarch's health. However, the appearance of King Chin surprised the inspector and his entire accompanying team. The ruler looked vigorous, noticeably thinner, and his complexion became lively and natural. King Chin, noticing their confusion, made it clear that physical exercise had brought him obvious benefit. His confidence and calm sharply contrasted with the expectations of the arriving officials. The inspector knelt with a dejected look, but didn't retreat from his intentions. He continued to insist that every ruler must serve as an example for his subjects. The inspector also emphasized that spending time on false sciences was unacceptable. In his opinion, it was much more important to direct efforts towards serving the state and strengthening order in the country. Left alone with the inspector, King Chin noted that he valued the devotion of officials. However, such persistent attempts to dissuade him from a useful cause he perceived as a personal challenge. Other members of the morals inspection also tried to influence Chin. They claimed that even with improvement in well-being, he shouldn't go hunting due to lack of shooting skills. King Chin didn't listen to them to the end. He made it clear that, if necessary, he was capable of learning shooting from soldiers and saw no obstacles in this. Straightening up before his guests, King Jin demonstrated determination. He intended to become a worthy example and was confident that he would be able to prove himself on the hunt. Finally, the long-awaited day of the hunt came. Soldiers lined up in the field, waiting for the start. Jin didn't delay and announced that this year he would personally lead the hunt. Jin raced on horseback at high speed, having given clear orders to the beaters and controlling the entire situation around. His confidence and determination gave those around a sense of order and stability, inspiring respect and admiration. People watching the king felt a mixture of surprise and joy. They saw the difference between last year and the present time, comparing his strength and condition, and with inner satisfaction noted noticeable changes. Last year, the king suffered from excess weight and weak muscles, which limited his activity and forced him to almost constantly remain in a palanquin, incapable of active walks and real participation in the hunt. Jin, controlling the horse, felt pleasure from movement and fresh wind. His joy was noticeable, and the very possibility of again enjoying horseback riding and freedom lifted his mood and gave strength to move forward. Nature around delighted eye and ear. Fresh air, rustle of grass, noise of foliage, and birdsong created an atmosphere of harmony. These sensations motivated the king to actively work on strengthening health and restoring strength. Suyun, watching his father, felt inspiration. Joy in his eyes strengthened confidence. He internally praised Jin for skillful horse control and understood that such a walk brought real benefit for the king's physical condition. Suddenly, a wild boar appeared at the edge of the forest. Zhou noticed it, which testified to the return of the king's vision. Jin's joy was so great that he sharply stopped the horse and prepared to act to take advantage of the moment. Inspector employees also participating in the hunt heard the joyful reactions of father and son. Their dissatisfaction was noticeable as they didn't share sincere emotions and considered such displays undesirable on the hunt. The inspector stood behind Suyun's back, evaluating what was happening as a potential threat. He mentally built plans, considering the hunt as a battlefield where anyone could become a victim, and thought over possible actions to achieve his goals. In the distance, joyful exclamations rang out that the king had successfully downed the boar. Most hunt participants gathered around Zhou, congratulating him and demonstrating respect to the master, which strengthened his status and raised the fighting spirit of all present. Suddenly, His Majesty didn't stay in the saddle, jumped off the horse and ran closer to the boar's carcass to make sure of the accuracy of the hit. The target was hit, and the king carefully examined the result, having assessed his skills. Next to him, two sons, laughing joyfully, approached their father. They felt delight from the fact that they saw for the first time how the king hits a target with a bow, remaining confident and composed on the horse's back. The king father again repeated that all today's successes occurred thanks to the great prince's book and sports activities. The chief inspector and his people listened with bowed heads, although such speeches seemed unnecessary and needless to them. Seriousness of face returned focus to the king, and he ordered all present to begin a new, healthy lifestyle according to his son, the great prince's method. People slowly realized the significance of the instruction, listening to it. Upon returning from the hunt, a pleasant surprise awaited Kong. The engineer brought a new machine, the manufacture of which took several months, and the device immediately attracted the prince's attention, arousing interest and desire to try its capabilities. An untiring athlete lived in the great prince. Immediately after jumping off the horse, he rushed to the machine and began pull-ups, demonstrating incredible strength and endurance that didn't allow him to lose a minute. After exercises with the upper block, Pol Suyun threw a robe over his body, sweaty from the load, and praised the engineer's new invention, noting its convenience and effectiveness for training, which gave the master confidence. The engineer rejoiced that he was able to please the master, but having tested the machine himself, began complaining about the difficulty of exercises. He almost dislocated his arm and realized how difficult the classes were, although the device was safe with proper use. The great prince sincerely admired the engineer's talent and commissioned creating a new machine for leg curls. He promised that after completing the work, the engineer would receive a deserved vacation, demonstrating trust and respect for the master's efforts. The engineer met the news with slight dissatisfaction. Used to being busy, he liked seeing how his products helped His Majesty recover, and he understood that constant work brought satisfaction and recognition from the king. A month later, a leg machine appeared in the courtyard of the royal palace. His Majesty regularly worked out on it, making efforts, and with each day became noticeably stronger, gaining new endurance and confidence in movements. Joint morning runs with the king became a constant habit for the great prince. He followed his father, gradually getting used to the rhythm and load, and both felt how their body and spirit strengthened, and the day began with energy. Horse walks for the king became mandatory and more active. Ill-wishers from the inspector circle followed them, trying to stop the king, spreading rumors that classes with the machine drove him to madness and weakened his mind. A week after the royal hunt, the chief inspector admitted that King Jin was indeed recovering thanks to the great prince's methodology. The inspector was preparing to move to a new place of work and understood that his intervention was no longer required. Saying goodbye, the chief inspector warned the great prince about potential danger coming from the head of Sarigam Zun, who recently acquired a large batch of soap. Zun's reputation left much to be desired, and rumors circulated about his connection with magical rituals, inspiring caution. Dreams are inherent to all people, regardless of time and place. Even the greatest personalities, finding themselves in a certain era or position, can see a nightmare that for a moment interrupts the usual course of their life and makes them think about the future and present. In the dream that Kong had, a television was working, showing modern people, historians, and experts. They spoke critically of the great Prince Suyun, noting that legend attributes to him the ability to travel through time, although the reliability of these stories remains doubtful. Waking up, Kang realized that it was unknown how much more time he would have to spend in the body of the great prince. While he was here, he needed to act so that his actions and decisions would look worthy in the eyes of future generations and the kingdom's history. The king father didn't know the content of his son's dream, but realized the younger's desire to support good and order. He decided to support the great prince in all his undertakings, trusting intuition and believing that his son's efforts would benefit the entire kingdom. Each new day brought Kang the opportunity to strengthen body and mind, develop skills, and maintain dignity. He understood that the responsibility was great, and any mistakes could affect history, but determination to act correctly helped overcome doubts. Suyun undertook the creation of a new writing system in Joseon. The king informed his younger son that they had books on phonology that could be useful for his work on the project. Prince Suyun worked diligently, and by the end of the work period came up with 28 new letters and also compiled a separate book in which he recorded his discoveries and principles for using the new characters. Meanwhile, the prince and princess's little son grew, began pronouncing first words, and the parents watched his development with interest, noting how quickly he absorbed new sounds and imitated adults. At one of the meetings, the older Prince brothers discussed the possibility of attracting an assistant for the trainer and jointly decided that the candidate should possess certain qualities to successfully cope with duties. The prince's choice fell on a young man named Len. He came from the people, was solidly built, looked attractive, and showed diligence in work, which made him a suitable candidate for the role under consideration. However, the idea of hiring a commoner into the royal staff was soon rejected, as those close to the king had to be related to him by blood, and such a criterion limited the choice of suitable applicants. A candidate was found quite quickly. It turned out to be So, the third son of the deposed crown prince of that era, whose family had a complicated reputation, but his family ties met the palace requirements for new appointments. So's father was King Qin's own brother, who at one time was distinguished by corrupt actions and a disorderly lifestyle, which led to deprivation of his titles and public respect in the kingdom. So also didn't escape rumors about dubious behavior, but despite this, he was invited to the palace for a meeting with his cousin to assess abilities, character, and potential compliance with duties in royal service. Seeing the king in good health, So concluded for himself that his cousin's methodology differed in effectiveness and thoughtfulness, and realized that cooperation with him could turn out to be useful and promising. They led the new assistant into the palace, showed all the machines, and briefly told about the methodology of therapeutic sports, about its benefits and positive results that the practice of this science brought. So noted that he was somewhat familiar with this new field, showing moderate interest and understanding that therapeutic sports are capable of improving physical condition and maintaining health. The great prince explained the reason for inviting So to the palace, indicating the importance of his participation in the royal family's life, after which So graciously agreed to remain in the offered position. Before starting work, one of the palace servants asked So to perform several exercises on the machine to check his physical preparation and level of mastering the methodology. For a moment, So thought that as an important person needed by the royal family, he could refuse, but realized that disobedience in these circles was unacceptable and dangerous for his career. Suyun turned the request into an order, and So immediately jumped on the machine, performing exercises one after another, demonstrating discipline and respect for palace rules. So that the newcomer wouldn't feel lonely, one of the prince's subjects who had long been engaged in sports showed his abilities and helped So feel more confident at the beginning of the work process. So quickly tired, didn't cope with the load, fell to his knees and begged to reduce the barbell's weight, showing that his physical strength was still insufficient for the proposed exercises. The great prince wasn't moved by what he saw, raised his voice and explained to the distant relative that despite his father's misdeeds, he was obliged to behave worthily, being a member of the royal family. Suyun's words affected So, who without getting up from his knees apologized for weakness. The apologies were accepted on condition that he learn the 3 main exercises and strictly follow instructions. The person responsible for a healthy lifestyle was a key position, and So understood that he could occupy it only if he lifted a total of 650 gun in 3 exercises. Success determined fate at work. In addition to physical preparation, every servant of the king and his family was obliged to study books about health to properly care for themselves and others. So carefully prepared for these classes, understanding the importance of knowledge. Prince the Great added that So must overcome gossip behind his back and make efforts to become part of the royal entourage. So understood that this was the only way to win trust and respect. So couldn't miss the chance to prove himself and get ahead. He realized that the path to perfection would be difficult and would require complete dedication, patience, and constant discipline. Prince the Great and his assistant promised So support in all undertakings, which gave the young man confidence. He felt responsibility for every step and understood the value of promises. In Joseon, there existed a special dialect that differed from Chinese. To simplify writing, a new system was created, consisting of 28 letters, which facilitated learning and communication. This new writing system was legalized and recognized as official in Joseon. Residents gradually got used to the innovation, and knowledge spread faster than before. Time passed, and Kang gradually forgot his past life. He got used to the prince's role. Suyun mastered his duties and accepted responsibility for the family, understanding the importance of new habits and rules. To everyone's surprise, the former soldier, athlete, and nutritionist became a decent family man and caring father. His energy and enthusiasm were combined with attention to his son, which pleased the prince and those around. The boy was active and cheerful, constantly watched workouts on the machines. He asked his father about why people get tired, being interested in the process and patterns of physical exercises. The uncle almost never left the machines, as he set himself the goal of working for the benefit of the kingdom. He explained his diligence by the fact that he realized the true importance of a healthy lifestyle too late. The little one boasted with sincere joy about a new book given to him by mom and dad. Despite his very young age, the boy listened to fairy tales with great pleasure and memorized every story. Inspired by the gift, the boy ran up to So and asked him to read him a fairy tale from the book. So agreed to spend time with the child, perceiving this as a rare opportunity to rest a bit. In this calm moment, Soo-yoon thought about how much time he had already spent here. More than 5 years had passed since moving into the prince's body, but the feeling of the world's alienness still hadn't disappeared. The modern world with gadgets, skyscrapers, cars, and planes seemed distant and almost unreal to him, like a memory from another life that was gradually being erased from memory. Here was his family, and also the idea of instilling a healthy lifestyle in everyone and teaching reading and writing according to a new methodology, in which he believed and invested all his strength. While he reflected, his young wife was working out with dumbbells. For her, such training had long become a routine matter and caused rather a smile than fatigue or tension. Suddenly, the princess's head spun, and she lost consciousness, but Soo-yoon managed to catch her in his arms in time, not allowing her to fall and get injured. Servants, frightened by what was happening, froze to the side and began quietly making guesses about the cause of Lady Yuk's sudden ailment, not daring to interfere without an order. The husband preliminarily determined the cause, having noticed nausea and weakness, and came to the conclusion that what was happening most likely indicated a second pregnancy. Time passed, and troubling thoughts didn't leave Kang. He increasingly noticed that many people he had accustomed to training eventually lost consciousness for no apparent reason, and this caused growing concern in the prince. Kang tried to understand the source of the strange ailment. He watched classes, analyzed loads and students' condition, but didn't find a clear answer, because of which the feeling of hidden threat only intensified with each day. Meanwhile, rumors had long been circulating around the area about some oddball who wanted a meeting with the great prince. They said this person was going to prove that he too was capable of lifting a stone weighing 250 kilograms. This oddball had once been fired from the army. The reason was that he couldn't maintain posture and didn't possess military bearing, because of which he was recognized as unsuitable for further service. At the same time, it was he in the past who was that very military officer who once suppressed a rebellion. This fact gave his image contradictoriness and aroused in others both distrust and hidden respect simultaneously. So told Soo-yoon the rumors he heard and openly mocked the audacity of the upstart who dared to challenge the great prince. His words sounded with contempt and confidence in Kang's superiority. During drunken conversations, the former officer also ridiculed the great prince's teachings. He didn't believe that His Majesty Jin really got better thanks to the classes, considering this empty fiction. Once in the midst of such conversations, loud laughter rang out behind the backs of the drinking companions. It sounded unexpectedly and sharply, making all present feel a chill and freeze warily. Turning around, they saw the great prince. He calmly pointed out the incorrectness of the rumors being spread and made it clear that his condition and abilities were greatly exaggerated in other people's stories. From what he saw, fear gripped the former officer, hiccups seized him, and he couldn't say a word. Soo-yoon meanwhile greeted his opponent and asked to give him a few minutes for an important conversation.